Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind the Curtain. This is the Steve and Dave's series that deals with the makers and shakers behind the scenes of the music industry, the people who were in their own way just as responsible for the hits that we've come to love as the actual singers and players. So we're going to be talking about Berry Gordy, the famous founder and impresario of Motown Records, and he's going to be our subject of this. We've already talked in this series about people like Ed Sullivan, Mama Cass,
George Martin.
George Martin, for instance, yes, and Phil Spector, another important producer. So Berry is, I think, our number 5, number 6 in the row.
And like some of the other people that we've talked about, Berry Gordy made his impact again behind the curtain as sort of a behind the scenes kind of player. But I think also, like a number of people that we've talked about in this series, he's a kind of known quantity that Berry Gordy in the American lexicon of popular music is, I think, a fairly well-known figure. And it's not without merit. I mean, I think that we'll try to make the argument here that Berry Gordy not only established a record label of some note, Motown, but also, I think, made a kind of cultural impact. I think, in fact, he made an enormous cultural impact. So,
oh yes,
yeah. So, Dave, so Berry Gordy. So let's maybe, what makes Berry Gordy significant? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, Berry Gordy was born November 28th, 1929. He was born into in a family of entrepreneurs, actually.
Yeah.
His father had brought the family up from, I think they were in
it was Georgia, wasn't it? It was, I thought it was
Georgia, right?
I can't, yeah, I think that's
and he moved the family up to Detroit in the 20s because, quite frankly, the racial tensions and violence down in Georgia at that time was getting extreme. There were lynchings, were at least a weekly occurrence. So like many of the people in the Great Migration, Berry Gordy too decided to move the family up to Detroit.
I think that's a key piece, Dave, that the Great Migration. I mean, Berry Gordy is, his success, I think, is very much connected to the fact that his family made that move to Detroit, as did thousands of African Americans in the early 20th century. I mean, one of the things, of course, that Detroit provided was opportunity for work. I mean, real work. It was not only work in the auto industry, but in ancillary industries. Detroit was, in fact, a very, very dynamic city in the kind of the mid 20th century. The population of Detroit, mid 20th century, is hovering around 2 million. I mean, I think it's hard to think about Detroit that way today, but Detroit's been an incredible decline over the past several decades, incredible decline. But boy,
Yes.
there's probably no place to make no better place to make a living in the United States than Detroit. And so it made, the family benefited tremendously by that move from the South to Michigan.
Yeah, absolutely. In Detroit, they set up several businesses. Berry Gordy too established the Booker T. Washington grocery store.
That's great.
Co-founded the Friendship Mutual Life Insurance Company, a life insurance company.
Yeah.
So really, these people had big plans. They really wanted to do well for themselves and for the family, and I think that's something that was very much passed down to children.
I think that's absolutely right. That clearly was a family not only of people who had an incredible work ethic, but as you're suggesting, had kind of big visions, big dreams, and shot and aimed high. And so that definitely was passed down to the children. I mean, when Berry Gordy talks about, I mean, Berry Gordy, for example, lived during the Depression, right? And he talks about that in his household, there really wasn't a depression, that there was food on the table, there was activity, you know, it was, and in part it's because of this incredible work ethic that his parents modeled. And other members of the family, it's just also suggesting, I mean, the Berry Gordy family is large, and everybody is engaged in entrepreneurial activity.
And even as a young man, I think he said he was 8 or 9 years old. He started off selling newspapers.
Yes.
In a white neighborhood.
Yeah,
It was, the Detroit Press or something like that. It was a black newspaper from the inner city. And he decided he was going to take it where nobody else was pushing it, which was the white neighborhoods. And did extremely well.
Yeah.
Made quite a bit of money on his first day doing that. So his idea was, well, I can make this much money by myself. Imagine how much I'll get. I'll just take my brother along and we'll both do it.
Yeah.
Well, that second trip wasn't nearly as successful. And he realized, one black kid is cute, two black kids is a threat. So he picked up on these things. Yeah.
He's very savvy about the notion of race, and I think, and I don't think that he was. I mean, as it proved later, these early experiences were very instructive. Berry Gordy, to his credit, really always was. He was really always, I think, an integrationist at heart, but he also saw the white market as the white market, and he figured out ways to put himself into that white market. And the newspaper example is a fascinating glimpse at all this. I mean, say this about Detroit: it was an economically vibrant city, but like most northern cities, it was deeply segregated, and also there were, really racial tensions in Detroit were real. They would explode at various points along the way, but what made Detroit a little unique again was that there was just so much money flowing through Detroit. But race was clearly a factor, so no question about that.
Well, right, and some of the artists will talk about having experienced, of course, a type of segregation in Detroit and some racial tensions.
Yeah,
but
that's right.
During one of their review tours, they actually did tour throughout the American South.
Yes, they did.
That was an entirely different game. So,
yeah, that's right.
Okay, but moving on. Berry Gordy Jr. or Berry Gordy III, he was referred to as Junior, quit high school in his junior year. He wanted to become a professional boxer. He saw that as his road to riches, and he was fairly successful, actually. He won the majority of his fights, but two things came in between. One of them was the Korean War, and he was drafted to Korea and spent I think like 3 years there. But the other thing was, during one of his practice bouts in the gym, he saw two posters hanging there. One of them was about kind of a battle of the bands sort of thing. Duke Ellington versus God knows, some other guy.
Right.
And another one about a prize fight. And he said he took a look at these two posters, and the music poster, Duke Ellington, he said, you look at those guys, those are 50 guys in their 50s, and they looked like they were in their 20s. And you looked at the fighting poster, and these were guys in their 20s that looked like they were 50.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And he said at that point, he decided maybe music would be the way to go.
Absolutely, I think that's
so.
Right. But I think that. But I'm curious, Dave. I'm going to ask you this: the boxing piece of it, a big part of his biography. I think that Berry Gordy always referenced the fact that he was a boxer. I think so. I'm just curious, what that boxing experience said about Gordy, maybe revealed about Gordy, because I do think it's important. So what's your take on Berry Gordy and that time in the ring?
Well, I think there are two things. He said he got into boxing because he saw that as his path to success.
Yes.
And I think that drove all of his considerations,
Right.
his life choices. What was going to be successful? What was going to make him money? And maybe in the second thing, what was going to get him girls? But I think money was always first, which makes it interesting that one of his first hits that he wrote was I want money. That's what I want, right?
I would say this. I definitely the quest for success, the quest for monetary success was enormous, and I do also think that the quest for the ladies was a big deal too. But I also think that boxing was in the African American community in this era extremely important. Joe Louis, for example, was an enormous figure, cultural figure, and
right.
Family followed boxing very, very closely. I also suggest it suggests something about his fearlessness. I mean, it is you have to have courage, just flat out have to have courage to be a boxer, and there is a certain kind of pugnaciousness to Gordy that is present throughout his entire career. And so there is something about that I think it reveals some of his character. But again, his time in the ring was cut short by a number of things, including sort of his good sense. But clearly the Korean War intervened as well. But I think the boxing thing really matters.
Well, yeah, and I think there really is just in general a parallel between boxing and entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
You have to realize you're going to get knocked down. It's going to happen. 100%. You may even experience, but you've got to get back up. You've got to get back in the ring, and you've got to stick at it to be successful. And I think there's a conviction there that if you stick at it, you will be successful. It's just a matter of making enough runs at it and finding the right approach.
I'd agree with that completely. I mean, I know we're just one metaphor after the next, but I do think that the boxing thing really matters and reveals a lot about Gordy. And I think you can just see it and he talks about himself, and when he recounts his own past and how he kind of spells out his own kind of biographical experience. I mean, that boxing thing is never left alone. I mean, it always comes up. It mattered. So we get to the 50s, Dave, right? And so he has this experience in Korea, like many Americans, comes back home, and then he's got responsibilities. Things are happening in his life. Well,
he has responsibilities because just shortly after his return from Korea, he married Thelma Louise Coleman in Toledo, Ohio. She was 19 years old. Yeah. And they had 3 children. So like right off the bat, he's got children, he's got responsibilities. The family's children, Hazel Joy, Barry, and Terry, provided the name for his first, for his publishing company, not his first publishing company, but a publishing company that he actually then received at least tens of millions of dollars for, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, when he sold them, when he sold it in the 2000s. Hazel Joy was Joe, Barry and Terry Te. The Joe Bet or Jobet Publishing was the publishing company, and was taken from these first 2 letters of his children's names.
So it's that's right. There's that, and so he's got these young kids. He's relatively newly married. He's in Michigan. He's in Detroit. He is working at a car plant at some point, right? He's working for Gerald.
Oh, there's a little intermezzo there.
Okay.
Where he starts his own business. His first business.
Oh, you're right. That's right. Yes.
Was a store selling jazz records.
Oh, this is very instructive. Yeah.
What's called 3 3D jazz, I think.
Yeah, that sounds right.
But
yes,
because he was selling jazz records and 3D glasses.
that's
Um,
yeah, well, you know.
Apparently, there was not much of a demand for either of those in Detroit in the late 50s. So he had to close the store. But what he realized from he was pushing jazz records, and people would be coming in and asking him for blues, for soul. And he says, well, we don't sell that here. And well, what they were selling there, they weren't interested in. He said, working people, they need something that speaks to them, something that moves them on a level, and in a level that jazz really doesn't. And I think that was a very, very important lesson on the way.
Well, so what's the lesson that he derived from that, do you think? I mean, I think it's important too. He also references that when he talks about his biography, but what is the lesson you think that he drew from the failed record store experience? I mean, how did that?
Well, in a nutshell, give the people what they want.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can have a fantastic product, but if nobody is looking for it, if nobody wants it, you're not going to sell it.
And I think that very much defines what Motown became, right? That Motown became a label that distributed songs that were, what the people wanted. It wasn't necessarily, Motown was never particularly cutting edge, at least in the early years. Berry Gordy was not really interested in delivering lessons or, being instructive or, kind of pushing the culture. He was really interested in delivering product that the masses wanted. And I think he learned that lesson in that record store experience. I don't have any question about that. I mean, the record store doesn't last very long, but that lesson was, that in many ways just sort of defines his time in the music industry past that.
Yeah, but you were going to say something about what came next for him.
Yeah, the next
store failed, but he still had a family to support, right?
Yeah, and so the realities are, it's you've got to put food on the table, and so like hundreds of thousands of others in Michigan, right? He goes to work in an auto plant, and he's putting in chrome. That was his job. Everybody in an auto plant has a small job, and so he was the chrome on the interior. And what he would try to do,
at Chrysler,
at Chrysler, there we go. And that he would try to, okay, so that was his job, but he in his head he had music in his head, and this is really the beginning of his songwriting career, which I think is really important. But anyway, in the plant, he would work quickly and then walk up the line to a place where the cars were passing by relatively unoccupied, and try to get his chrome in before his station, so that he would give himself longer gaps of time within the plant, so that he could think about songwriting. And so even while he was engaged in one activity, his mind was in another. But fairly early on in his career in the auto plant, he quit his job. And he describes then when he goes home and he tells his wife, honey, I've quit the auto plant. I think I'm going to be, I'm going to go into music. I'm going to go into songwriting. And her exact words were, get out. And so he has to go to his sister's place, and his sister says, well, what do you think? What did you think she was going to say? But from that point, Berry Gordy was really pointed in a very, very different direction. But I also think it says something about Berry Gordy and his relationship with women a little bit, that there is, and relationship with people in general. That Berry Gordy was very much kind of followed his own compass. And so when he felt convinced it was time to move in a particular direction, he just went in that direction. And if there were consequences, there were consequences. And so Berry Gordy becomes engaged in songwriting.
Yeah, so at least in his personal relationships, it wasn't always a question of give the people what they want.
I think that's true.
Yeah, in fact, he divorced his first wife in 1959, which was the same year he started Motown.
Yeah.
Or actually Tamla Records, but we'll get to
Tamla. Yeah. So, but the songwriting. But I think this is if we could talk a little bit about the songwriting. This I think is an overlooked part of Gordy's story. I think a little bit overlooked. And I
definitely think so. Yeah.
And I think had the songwriting if it had gone a different direction for him, if he had felt a little less aggrieved by it, I wonder if he ever would have started Motown, because so much of his energy starting the record company was in fact because he felt he was being shortchanged as a songwriter. But maybe you could
Well, and he was.
Yeah.
I think he clearly was. He wasn't making much money in that. All right, really, the start of his success as a songwriter came when he got together with his sister, Gwen.
Yeah.
She was older than him, but she of the 8 or 9 children that his parents had, she was the one just above him in age.
That's right. Yeah.
So they were in terms of age. And the two of them, along with Billy Davis, who went under the name Tyrone Carlo, wrote a number of hits for Al Green. Not Al Green, the singer, but Al Green, the owner of the Flame Show Bar, which was kind of an upscale locale in Detroit back in the day. And Al Green owned this musical review bar,
Yeah.
and manager of several acts, and also had a publishing company.
Did.
Gwen and Anna Gordy owned the photo concession at this place. So they take pictures of people who were there having a good time and sell those. But through this, she had the connection to Al Green, and that's how it all started. So they started writing songs and selling them to Al Green, and they created a number of hit record songs. The first one, Jim Dandy Got Married. Never heard of it, but it was a hit for Laverne Baker.
Yeah, well, Laverne Baker was a big deal. Yeah.
All I Could Do Was Cry. Do you know who sang that?
I don't know.
Etta James.
Oh my gosh.
So
an enormous talent.
There's also this Chess Records connection, which is ongoing in the very first few years of Motown. But they wrote that for her. It became a hit for her. The biggest collaboration that they had was with Jackie Wilson, who Al Green had for the Flame Show Bar, and they had a series of hits with him. Lonely Teardrops, To Be Loved, which became the title of the Berry Gordy's autobiography.
Right.
That's Why, I'll Be Satisfied, and Reet Petite.
Yep, that in particular, right?
Yeah. That led to the first connection between Berry Gordy and Smokey Robinson. Smokey Robinson had gone with his group, the Matadors, which would of course become the Miracles, to Al Green, had auditioned for him, and he gave him a pass. But Gordy was listening to the audition. When they came out, he said, "Hi, my name is Berry Gordy.
Yeah.
I just listened to your song. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was great. Do you have other songs?" And Smokey Robinson said, "Wait, Berry Gordy, are you the guy that wrote Reet Petite?"
Yeah, there we go.
So that established him as kind of an authority, someone with success, understood something about the music business, and that, he became the manager for Smokey Robinson and the Miracles at that point.
Yeah, it's fascinating.
And
Gordy, and from there, and we'll get to the formation, but it's that period,
right.
It's a songwriter that is, I think, completely overlooked. He really had an ear for this. He really had an ear for crafting hits. And I definitely think that as a music industry impresario, he used that skill greatly. But had that been more lucrative, had he not felt he had been robbed in terms of the publishing, I think there's no reason to. I mean, Berry Gordy as songwriter, I mean, that could have continued for a long time because he knew
Oh,
what
sure.
it was. I mean, and he was, I mean, and he was just getting started. I mean, it's really quite remarkable. I mean, that
Well, if you imagine a Berry Gordy at like the Brill Building,
yes,
where he was getting like a real salary for doing the work he was doing.
absolutely, right.
You wonder if that would have been enough for the entrepreneur.
Well, I hear you.
You know, but still, you can imagine him doing that for much longer than he actually.
No question. Yeah, he would. Yeah, as a songwriter for a very short amount of time, but just really, really productive. It just, I mean, amazingly productive, I think.
And there's this story that Gordy tells is that he got back a check for no, I guess Robinson tells the story for one of the songs, and it's under $4.
Right.
And he said, you know, back in the day, they paid you if they felt like paying you, and they paid you whatever they felt like paying you. And said, well, you know, man, why don't you just, if this is all you're going to get out of it, you might as well just do it yourself.
Right.
And so, on that suggestion, Gordy approached his family, who had a family like a co.
Yeah, this is really interesting. Yes.
Yeah, which says so much about the Gordy family as an entrepreneur family.
It does. It really does.
The members of the family would pay in $10 a month into this co-op, and that amount would be there to give loans to family members who needed financing. And I guess the loan that they made of $800 was the first one that actually had been made. But he approached the family co-op for $1,000.
Yes,
got 800.
Got 800. Didn't give him the
and with
everything.
He said they were hard as nails. But
yes.
They gave him this $800, and with the $800, he started the publishing company and the first record company, which was Tamla Records, and that remained as a label when Motown came up. But
it did, and briefly with the Tamla,
he wanted to name it Tammy Records after Debbie Reynolds movie, right? But that name, I guess there was already a record label named Tammy. So
let me ask you a question about that. So it's Berry Gordy, it's Detroit. He wants to name record label after a Debbie Reynolds song. So what do you think was behind? I mean, maybe he liked the song. I assume he probably did like the song. But what do you think he was behind his, just like the name? Or because I think it was strategic.
Well, it might have been.
I think it was.
He was a businessman first. I mean, that was always his thing. In fact, years later, talking about his legacy, looking back, he said, you know, I wanted to make a little bit of money, meet some girls, and maybe give back to the community. But I think it was kind of in that order, right? So
I think
it was always there was always that thing, the music business is a business, right?
Yeah.
So and
gonna sell records, gotta sell records. Yeah.
You can sell records to a Black audience, but you're missing out on the large audience that's out there. If you can make the crossover, if you can sell a wide audience as well, then you have a chance of making money. Then you have a chance of selling millions of records, but only then.
I think that's exactly it. And so Tamla is established. It is the first of the, and there are a number of record labels that Gordy has his hand in. It's actually quite an astounding list, but Tamla is
right.
Tamla's first.
And you know, part of it had to do with the rules back then that radio stations could only play couldn't play more than 2 records from the same record company in an hour or something like that. Strange and arcane.
From the payola scandal, yeah.
Because of payola, right?
Right.
And he got around that partially by having these different labels.
It's genius, actually. It's really amazing. But it ends up being a fairly, I think, unwieldy list in its own way. But okay, so he's
but another thing is he would start companies and let them drop just as required, as needed, and if something wasn't successful, he let it go.
Yeah, he had very little emotional connection to most of his business dealings, business kind of companies. There would be some exceptions to that, but you're right. I mean, I think he was a very strategic thinker in that regard.
The first hit was with the Miracles, Got a Job.
Yeah. Which
was kind of an answer to Get a Job, the song. But the bigger hit came in 1959 with Money, That's What I Want. Singer Barrett Stone. Same songwriter combo that had all the hits with Jackie Wilson.
Yeah.
Barrett Stone sang this, and it was distributed by Anna Records. You know anything about Anna Records?
I don't.
Anna Records was a record company that his sister Gwen, her boyfriend, their writing partner, Billy Davis, Anna Gordy had put together. They actually wanted him to come into Anna Records, but he was already thinking about putting his own record company together. So he didn't do that, but he also didn't have this record company in place to distribute
the money, yeah.
So he had Anna Records do that. They did it, their distribution through Chess Records out of Chicago, and it became a national hit.
It was a big hit, yeah, big hit. Copied, covered by the Beatles, many others. I mean,
yes.
Big song.
It's a big song, and again, Berry Gordy was part of that songwriting team.
Yeah, right.
And we're going to see his hand in a number of huge hits as we go along. But okay, that was the last one of the Motown hits that Motown itself that was not distributed by Motown. So, in fact, the next year, Anna Records was absorbed by Motown, and they all came to work for him. The next hit, the first Tamla release, actually was "Come to Me" by Marv Johnson.
Yeah.
Also a hit, not a great hit, but respectable. The first big hit that they had was "Shop Around." Smokey Robinson,
yeah.
And he tells an interesting story. "Shop Around" had been out on the streets already for a couple of weeks, and he gets a call at 3 o'clock in the morning. He says, "Yeah, hey, this is Berry Gordy." He says, "Yeah, I recognize your voice." He said, "Look, I couldn't sleep. I've been thinking about Shopping Around. I think we need to redo it. I have some ideas how we could jazz it up a little bit, make it a little bit happier." And I said, "Okay, well, yeah, fine. We'll see you in the morning." No, you need to get down here now." So he dragged him into the studio at 3 o'clock in the morning, and they redid the song, and it became a huge hit. It became really their first big hit. But this was a re-release after it had already been out for a couple of weeks. It was doing okay, but it wasn't a hit. So it just was driving Berry Gordy crazy, and he rethought it out, and they reproduced it, and boom.
And it's fair to say that the Motown really leaned very heavily on Smokey Robinson and the Miracles. That is it not the case really that that this was the first sort of breakout, was the breakout group for Motown, and that the success of the label very much rested on both Berry Gordy's shoulders and Smokey Robinson's shoulders. That the Miracles,
oh yeah, absolutely,
extraordinarily important. They really were the backbone of the label.
Yes, and it's really hard to imagine what Motown might have been without Smokey Robinson. But it was kind of a mentor student relationship between them, and but Gordy talks about the time when Robinson came in with one of his songs and played it for him, and he just realized, okay, well. Can't talk about him being a student anymore. He's writing songs than I am.
That's right, absolutely.
You know,
and
actually, the first big hit, the number one pop of the pop charts was "Please, Mr. Postman" by Marvelettes.
Yeah.
And they came in and were surprised to see this good-looking guy on the drums. Marvin Gaye.
Marvin Gaye, yeah.
And see, this is kind of I think, part of the success formula of Motown is that not only did it attract all sorts of talent, but it mixed. These people were mixing all the time, sitting in on each other's sessions.
Yes.
Gaye would play drums in this one thing, would sing, would be back up in another thing, would play piano for someone else, you know, and they were all doing that. They were all contributing what they had to whoever needed it at that particular moment.
Absolutely.
And I think that's huge.
I think it's right. It was, and so talk a little bit why that's unusual, though. I mean, now it's the early '60s, and the record business is starting to boom, both in Detroit, but certainly in Los Angeles and in London. But this was not the typical kind of studio scene, right? I mean, what happened in Motown was, you talk a little bit about what you would have seen in another studio in another city. How would that have worked?
Well, we talked a little bit about the Wrecking Crew also in Behind the Curtain. These were for studio musicians, and you had your individual artists coming in singing. They would sing their song. Needed other talent, of course. You don't make a hit record just with a vocal.
Absolutely.
But it wasn't. Most of these acts did not have a band. They did not have someone who was creating the music behind them. So it was all the artists themselves were very isolated in terms of they would come and they would do their thing at the studio, and there would be friendships and things like that, but they weren't working together in that sense, you know, and some of it was very cutthroat.
Absolutely. I think that's the main thing.
I think that's the thing that was really the difference here, because part of what Gordy referred to as the production line approach that he got from his experience at Chrysler. Right. He said competition creates quality, but it was a competition between family members. And I think this is something that was kind of taken over from his family's philosophy.
I think that's something to that, yeah.
Everybody does the best that they can to create their own success, but you're also there for other people, even people that you're competing against.
Right.
And I think that's just amazing. It's an amazing thing in any business, but I think in the music business, certainly no less. Right.
That's right. And that's what you described there. Then really very much defines the Motown experience in the early 60s, at least as long as Hitsville, USA was in Detroit, right? That this kind of competition within family, a kind of nurturing, but with nurturing atmosphere, was very much in play. Producers would work with other acts. People would give their songs to other acts. People would give, like you was talking about Marvin Gaye on drums, and we're going to put Marvin on vocals, this kind of thing. This happened all the time within the studio environment. It was very, very unusual.
So you've got this going on. An example of that is one of the hits by the Miracles, Mickey's Monkey.
Yeah.
Smokey Robinson came into the studio one day and said, "Hey, everybody come on in. I've got a song." And it was supposed to just kind of have a kind of a party atmosphere. Right. So he wanted as many people there as possible. It sounded like a party. And he had the Temptations in there. He had Supremes singing back up to that. He had Martha Reeves and the Vandellas in there. Everybody that was there at the time just came into the studio and took part in this production. And it was maybe the greatest concentration of talent on any single
probably so, actually, yeah.
Ever,
Absolutely.
But that's the thing that was going on back then. Little Stevie Wonder, Steve Judkins, I think was his real name.
Yes.
And Berry Gordy then named him Stevie Wonder because the kid was a wonder. He came in, one of the Miracles brought him in. And he sat down on the piano and played something incredible. Went over to the drums, started playing on that. Picked up a guitar, was playing the guitar. And then at the end of all that, he whipped out a harmonica and blew everybody away on that. And people were just standing agape. They were just amazed. This was an 11-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And just seemed to master all of these instruments. So yeah, little Stevie Wonder, they picked him up. In fact, the first #1 album of the Motown group was 12-Year-Old Genius, Stevie Wonder's debut album.
Right.
And it contained the #1 hit, Fingertips Part 2.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with Fingertips Part 2?
Yes, I am.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's just incendiary.
I watched this. Fortunately, the performance was filmed, so they have it on film.
Yeah.
You want to say something about that?
Well, no, it's just it's Stevie Wonder in the moment, in live, and Little Stevie Wonder, and he has got the crowd is enraptured. He is almost in a state. It's just he's in the zone.
Absolutely in the zone, right?
It's just it's unreal.
And that was
hard to describe. It's a singular piece of music, and it's very unlike other Stevie Wonder releases. I mean, it stands apart, but there's just something about it that's just like, just in the moment.
He's a 12-year-old kid. He had come out to do an encore.
Yeah.
Well, not even to do an encore. He had come out just to take a bow, essentially, because he had received standing ovations, and he just started into this. There were bands at the time. The band that had backed him up had left the stage, and the second band was coming on for the next performer, and he's going into this. And you can hear in the recording one of the band members say, "What key? What key?" Because they just had to improvise, because he was improvising.
What's
not a song.
Yeah.
It's incredible.
It's incredible. No, it's incredible. I think
It will be on our playlist too.
yeah,
You've got to check.
no, it's amazing, and it's absolutely the case that Gordy and Stevie Wonder developed an extremely close relationship. I think, a kind of paternal relationship, and that Motown, I think, by all accounts, treated Stevie Wonder very fairly, and provided for his education. And really, I think they were mindful of the fact that this could be a very exploitative relationship. But I think they went. It's my sense that Motown went the extra mile to make sure that Stevie was, this young man was taken care of and protected.
Well,
way.
And Berry Gordy tells a story about going to Stevie's 21st birthday party, and a fantastic event. Everybody was there. Everybody was having fun. And the next day, he gets a call from Stevie Wonder's lawyers that he was looking to change labels.
Yeah.
But they worked it out.
Yeah.
Stevie Wonder himself said he could have gotten more money elsewhere, but he kind of wanted to stay home. And since Berry Gordy was willing to give him the artistic freedom that he was asking for or demanding, he stayed with the company. And Berry Gordy said it was the best decision I ever made.
Oh, I think.
And if you look,
because the output of
some of the greatest success that Motown still had in the 70s was because of Stevie Wonder.
I think, and if anything, I mean, there are a couple of artists in Motown, I think namely Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder, that took Motown in a very creative direction. And clearly Wonder's output from the 70s is it's magnificent. And it's the product of that kind of freedom, that kind of creative freedom that he was given.
Yeah, most of the number one hits that Motown had in the 70s were from Stevie Wonder. And maybe after Diana Ross, well, if you don't include the first couple of years with Jackson 5, of course.
Right. Of course, yeah.
After Diana Ross, maybe Marvin Gaye. So yeah, it was a handful of artists that were keeping Motown up, propping Motown up in the 70s, essentially.
I think that's right. And so in one of we probably should talk here at some point about the girl groups in Motown and maybe even the relationship with the Supremes, which became, I think, by most measures, the most important, one of the most important acts in Motown, arguably alongside the Miracles, Smokey Robinson Miracles, that was, in the 60s, the Supremes very much a dominant group. And also the Supremes became the kind of face of Motown, because the Supremes made so many appearances on television, namely the Ed Sullivan Show, which we've also talked about in the Behind the Curtain series.
Yes.
But the Supremes were, again, a kind of local group. They were not only from Detroit, but actually from the neighborhood. I think Gordy Diana Ross, I think, lived down the street from Gordy, something. I mean, they were in physical proximity during this era.
Yeah, the Primettes, the group that would become the Supremes, auditioned Gordy in 1960, but they were still in school.
Oh, they were.
So
yes,
they were kids. So he told them, "Come back when you've got your high school degree," and we'll talk. And they did. A year later, they came back, and Motown invested a lot in the Supremes.
I think that
for a long time, there was no payoff. They were known as the no-hit Supremes.
Yes,
that hit Bill U for several years. But before we talk a little bit more about the Supremes, let's talk about part of the production line, which was the artist development.
Yes, that's a critical piece here.
Which included things like choreographer work, but also work on etiquette and manners and dress.
That's right.
And how to carry yourself and present yourself in
Comportment. Yes, right.
comportment. There was a woman who did nothing else but
That was her job.
teach the Motown artists
That's exactly right.
essentially how to be acceptable to a large audience.
That's right.
And this is part of what you were talking about before. Gordy looking to get a crossover, looking to get accepted by a wide audience. And this was an important part about it, that when Motown artists appeared, when they performed, whether it was on stage or on television, they were in suits,
That's right.
ties, women wore long dresses, all very top-notch, all very chic, and that's part of the entire Motown. Very clean, very uptown, you know.
Absolutely. There was a certain grace and elegance to all the Motown groups. And that as you're suggesting that their stage performance was, I mean, from the moment they took the stage to the moment they left the stage, they were, if you will, kind of in character. Motown groups had, the choreography was, for all the groups, right, was played out. They worked, you know, day and night in the basement of Hitsville, USA, working on their steps. And as you're talking about the outfits and stuff, there was a certain glamour to the Motown groups. I think this particularly became evident when television began to break, certainly in the 1960s, right? And that these sort of national shows where groups would be showcased. And again, we come back to Ed Sullivan, because Ed Sullivan, to his credit, was not afraid to bring black acts on his show. And he really was very fond of Motown acts in particular. And I think Berry Gordy owes a lot of his success to Ed Sullivan. I think Ed Sullivan, a fair amount of success to Berry Gordy.
I think that's true. Oprah Winfrey tells an interesting story.
Oh, that's
about seeing Martha Reeves and the Vandellas singing. I think it was.
Well, was it Heat Wave or was it Dancing in the Streets? I don't remember.
I think it was Dancing in the Streets.
Okay.
Anyway, she's watching Ed Sullivan, and he introduces this black girl group.
Right.
And she couldn't believe it.
No, right.
They were so incredible. They were so poised, and they were on the Ed Sullivan Show.
That's right. That's exactly it.
And she said she missed the first song because she was so busy calling up everyone she knew, colored people on TV, colored people on TV.
That's right.
It just, it was mind-blowing. And for her, really the first indication that maybe that wasn't forbidden land anymore, you know?
I think that the work that the Gordy and crew put in to develop, you know, this kind of holistic approach to musicality and to stage presence and all of that. But I think it paid enormous dividends particularly during the 1960s, and particularly on shows like Ed Sullivan, which primarily aimed at, you know, kind of a wide audience. And it helped obviously to break down boundaries, and it obviously helped to sell records. But I think though, when we talk about the Hitsville, USA, Motown in the 60s, it very much is a label that is eventually becomes kind of dominated by the Supremes. And the Supremes were, again, this 3-woman act, but Diana Ross, for a variety of reasons, emerges as the focal point. I think people who know the Supremes and understand the infighting that happened within the group, and there was a lot of tension within the group, and there was, you know, it was a difficult time, but Ross emerges as the leader, as the focal point, in part because of the gaze of Berry Gordy. Now, maybe that's unfair, and maybe, you know, well, maybe you've got a thought about that, but I do think that it's instrumental as Gordy was with the rise of the Supremes. I think Gordy was equally instrumental in the demise of the Supremes.
Well, yeah, I really can't speak to that. I think we won't get around talking a little bit about his relationship with Diana Ross, but getting back just a second to the no-hit Supremes, they were signed by Motown in 1960, and their first 6 singles didn't chart.
Right.
Well, that's not quite true. Let Me Go the Right Way was number 26 on the R&B charts. So only 90 on pop. So it broke the top 100 in pop charts, but that was all that happened. And those singles were produced either by Gordy or by Robinson.
Yep.
But then the premier writing team at Motown, Holland Goes Here, Holland,
right,
took over. Actually, it was a song written by one of the Holland brothers. For, I believe it was for, I believe it was for Martha Reeves. Okay. And he took it to her, and he said, here it is. And she said, well, we're not going to do it. We don't sing that sort of stuff. And this is the sort of thing that they had never heard any artist say to them.
Yeah. Right.
Then he went and said to the Supremes, oh, look, here's a song I wrote for you. And they weren't really happy about it either. But Berry Gordy came in and heard them singing and said, oh, I think that's going to be a hit.
Right.
And that was Where Did Our Love Go?
Yep.
It was the first number one hit. It was the first of 5 in a series.
Breakout hit for them, for sure.
Where Did Our Love Go? Baby Love, Come See About Me, Stop in the Name of Love,
yeah,
Back in My Arms Again. And these were all in the hands of Holland Goes Here, Holland. That was the combination. That was the trick that got the Supremes the charts and kept them.
So again, part of the secret sauce with Motown always was the songwriting, right? And so they had a stable of very consistent songwriters, very productive songwriters. It was largely a nurturing environment, although there were certainly disputes there, and the songwriting team that you just mentioned eventually left Motown in a dispute over money. But it is the case that it wasn't simply enough. It wasn't simply enough to look good and to sound good. You also had to have solid songs, and Motown across the board, right? Temptations, Supremes, Four Tops, Marvin Gaye, all of that, right? The songs were great. The songs, of course, were not particularly controversial. The songs were not dark, really, in any kind of way. That was intentional. That they really made sure that the music was the kind of music that kids and parents were like on the car at the same time.
Definitely.
And there was never really any kind of hint of darkness or any hint of violence within even songs about relationships. It was, to some degree, I think the music of Motown was extraordinarily uplifting, and that was by design. I mean, that was intentional.
Sure.
Yeah, and so in that sense, it was. I think some critics of Motown would suggest that it's a little homogenized, right? Particularly given the era, right? Particularly given what's happening in the African American community, right? That there's a bit of a disconnect between what Motown is producing and what's happening in the larger culture. But to some degree, right, the proof is in the pudding, and that Motown keeps selling songs really throughout the '60s, in part because of the great songwriting, in large part because.
And while we're on that, that really is something that first it kind of got a crack when Norman Whitfield started producing psychedelic soul.
Right.
With Temptations.
Yep.
Who've been produced by Smokey Robinson for years. But the Temptations had a lot of success with the songwriting team, Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong. Barrett Strong, that name rings a bell. Where have we heard that before?
There we go. Money. That's what I want.
Money. Right. That was his hit as a singer, but he had a number of hits with Norman Whitfield together as a writer for the Temptations, and was part of the songwriting team for this psychedelic soul. Norman Whitfield was the producer of those songs, and took the Temptations and with them a large part of the Motown mystique in a slightly different direction.
I think that's
and Berry wasn't at all happy with songs like Cloud 9.
Yes.
Sounded like a reference to drug use.
Yes. Which
I'm fine here on Cloud 9.
Probably was
very unhappy with that, but
extraordinarily, yeah.
Let It Be was not happy with All of Confusion, which was talking about all the things that were going wrong. World is a ball of confusion today. Problematic, why are we talking about these things? But let it happen. I think the biggest problem we had was with Marvin Gaye.
Yes.
And his What's Going On album.
So so that takes us to like 1970, right? And so Marvin had been with the label for really, I think, almost a decade up to this point. Marvin Gaye was married to Berry Gordy's sister, who was
Anna, right? One of his sisters.
I believe 17 years older than Marvin. I believe that that's right.
That could be, yeah.
I think that that's right. And so the thing, again, when you talk about Motown and the Gordys, is that there is this kind of interrelationship that is just, it can be kind of hard to sort of pull apart. But Marvin Gaye had success with duets during the 1960s. I think probably most famously with Tammy Terrell, but he hit the top of the charts with these duets over time. Tammy Terrell
and Tammy Terrell, of course, died tragically.
Yeah. And he was,
so that was the end of a very successful singing duo.
Absolutely. So Marvin Gaye is suddenly sort of on his own, and this stuff is brewing in the larger culture, right? In terms of what's happening with the war in Vietnam, with civil rights, and of course then with the environment. And Marvin Gaye, I don't know that anyone really saw this coming, but Marvin Gaye then put together an album, What's Going On, and it became a landmark album. I think
it was an incredible album.
It's from
Robinson still says it's favorite album of all time, bar
start to finish. It is incredible. It's groundbreaking in a way, and Berry Gordy wasn't happy about it in the least.
And really did not want to release it, and maybe wouldn't if Marvin Gaye had not threatened to quit.
Yeah, I mean I think that's exactly right. And so Marvin Gaye then gets his way, and the album's released, and it's not only a hit, but it's a kind of cultural phenomenon, and I think it very much changes Marvin Gaye's how he is perceived in the industry. I think you can argue maybe it's his high watermark as an artist. But also
how he's received in the Black community. I think he
100%,
a lot of respect for that. I mean, not that he was not respected before, but I think it took him up a notch.
It definitely elevated him. I also think it reveals something about Gordy in that Gordy was really after monetary success. And I think that when push came to shove, if Berry Gordy thought a record was going to sell, he would release it, even if it had links, it had some allusions to drug use, even if it was, an overtly political album like What's Going On. I think in the end, Gordy wanted hits. And so say what you will about, the family atmosphere and creating a kind of ambiance and, music that parents and kids can listen to. That's what I want, money, right? And so for Gordy, I think it really the pursuit of the hit was in the end the most important.
And he had a great feeler for that, but he also had some really notable bad decisions, and one of them was Heard It Through the Grapevine, right? That was another Whitfield Strong,
yeah.
and Norman Whitfield was pushing that really hard, and Gordy didn't want anything to do with it. But he said, well, can I record it with Marvin? And Gordy said, look, if you stop bugging me, you can do whatever you want to with it.
Yeah, that's right.
So he recorded it with Marvin Gaye. That recording was not released at first.
That's right.
Then he recorded it with Gladys Knight and the Pips. It became a #2 single.
Big song for them. Big, yeah, that's
Big
right.
song for them. Their biggest song with Motown, I believe.
I think that's right, yeah. Before they moved to Buddha, yeah, I think that's right.
And then, probably based on their success, released as part of an album with Marvin Gaye, and it became a runaway success.
Oh, it's a transcendent song, absolutely.
In the Motown documentary, they said it was the most successful Motown song ever, which I find hard to believe because Motown had huge hits, but that's what they said.
Well, yeah, it's
#1 hit that Motown had.
Does that? Well, that's okay. That seems interesting and surprising, actually. Does it suggest that maybe on some level, maybe Berry Gordy's just unflinchingly honest, and then that to his credit. But does it suggest that on some level Berry Gordy lost his touch a little bit? That he maybe lost at least was a little bit out of touch with the larger culture, because he was famously, stood in the way of all these songs that we've mentioned, all these artists, all these albums, all these hits that we've mentioned, and he was wrong about all of them. I mean, like all of them, and they were monster cultural changing kinds of songs.
Yeah, I still think on balance his record is largely in favor of right decisions, but he made he had some real stinkers.
Yeah, and I guess if you're in the game long enough, you're going to have some stinkers. And then to his credit, he's owned up to it in part because they were such monstrous hits. But that I from in my mind, I start to wonder if maybe he loses his touch a little bit. We should talk.
Maybe. I think you're definitely right about the fact that you're going through the 60s. There's so much happening in the Black community with the civil rights movement, and maybe let's talk a little bit about this parallel development, because Motown was not only influenced by that, but it also had an influence in that time on what was going on.
Sure did. Yeah, it did.
There was a Motown review tour that Gordy sent his artists on.
That's right.
And I think maybe irresponsibly, they also toured the South during that tour, and had some dangerous.
They had trouble. No, they did.
Experiences, but also they would go through the same town twice sometimes, like on their return.
Yep, the return.
They would, and they say where the audience was split white and black before when we performed. Everybody was up dancing together.
This is
and it was an integrated crowd.
This is, I think,
and I think Motown and music in general. I think we see that throughout the history of pop music, but Motown in particular really did a lot for breaking down certain.
Well, I think that's right.
Certain walls, right?
I think that's right. I think without question that when you talk about the civil rights movement in the 60s and the changes in the culture regarding segregation on the path to a kind of desegregation, I mean, Motown is right there in the mix, and that that music was extraordinarily important. It was embraced by white audiences as well as Black audiences. And you're talking about then these tours, these Motown reviews, which became really quite famous. I mean, just the stable of artists, and when they hit your town, right, it was really something. But like you say, when they returned to town, something had changed. I mean, something had changed in the people who were, had attended these shows. I do think that they made a difference. I think that civil rights leaders acknowledged as much during the era that Motown was making a difference. I think Berry Gordy, as much as he had an aversion to being overtly political, recognized that the effect and the responsibility that Motown had in this regard. I don't think there's any question about it, that when you talk about the United States in the 1960s and changes in the culture, that Motown's a big part of this, because it changed the way people felt, about music and about each other. I think it's an enormous contribution. I think in the end, maybe it's Motown's biggest contribution.
Well, Martin Luther King had a particular understanding of the value of popular culture in achieving integration.
That's right.
He visited the Motown offices and said, I'd like to be associated with your brand.
That's right.
Which just, of course, blew Berry Gordy away.
Absolutely. But I mean, Martin Luther King, first of all, he knew what a winner was. And he also then recognized what was the effect that Motown was having across the country, frankly, across the world, but particularly in the United States. And like you say, Martin Luther King was very in touch with popular culture. He famously had the conversation with Nicole Nichols, right, of Star Trek. Nicole Nichols was dissatisfied with the role as Lieutenant Uhura and was thinking about maybe leaving the show. And he said, "No, you're important. You're making it."
Yeah, please don't do that. Right.
Please don't do that. Yeah. It's true. So in terms of Gordy, I mean, obviously eventually the Motown, it physically shifts from Detroit to Los Angeles. Hitsville, USA is left for the all is gold in California. Gordy himself, right, becomes less engaged in the music business and basically kind of steps away, and mid-70s begins to focus more on film, actually. It becomes deeply connected to both Dinah Ross personally and professionally. What's important about that? I mean, is that meaningful in some way? I think it kind of is, but does it?
Well, yeah, I think it's meaningful. I think if we're talking about a history of Motown, we have to talk about that. But it's opening up a whole new can of beans. If we want to talk about Berry Gordy as a music producer, as a force in the music industry, we probably need to stop in 1973. I think that would be the time, because that's when he steps down as president of Motown Records.
I think that's right. Yeah.
And becomes chairman of the board of Motown Industries or something like that, where the whole conglomerate of movies and television and all that stuff. Right. Maybe if we talk about his influence on the music industry, probably 1973 is where we would end it.
I think that's fair.
We'll talk about the end of his dynasty. Maybe just come back to some of the things that made Motown so successful as a machine. Yeah. And a lot of it, I think, goes back to this production line approach. Now, I don't really get the production line thing. I think that's an analogy or a metaphor that Gordy, God knows, Gordy used it all the time.
He did.
He talked about his approach as being a production line approach. But one of the things where I think there is actual something to that is the quality control. And the idea was producing this music. There are weekly quality control meetings where they talk about, okay, the Miracles have produced this song The Temptations are working on this song. We have the Supremes with this. Which one are we going to be releasing?
Yeah.
Which one has the greatest chance of making it? And why do you not think this other one is? What do you think is wrong with it? And Smokey Robinson said, everybody was brutally honest in those meetings. And sometimes a song that you were really fond of would not be chosen.
Right.
But they would give you some feedback that you could use to go back and actually improve on it. And he gives this example of Tracks of My Tears.
Yeah.
Because he was going to end the song on I need you, I need you. And they said, why would you do that when you have this great line? What is the
Uh-oh. I don't know either.
Well, a blanket on it's what he ended up actually ending the song with then. And he said it was a much stronger song after that.
Yeah, getting that and those other, yeah.
And it was a hit, so arguably that was really an important step in the process.
I would.
We've already talked about the artist development.
Yeah.
I
think there was also a coherency with the label itself, right? In terms of this quality control, when they released songs, they recognized that the Motown label, the Tamla Motown label, was a kind of brand. And they were, I think, were very sensitive to this sort of being, consistent with the brand. And that I actually think that in the initial years of Motown, brand loyalty, if you will, within the company was more important than loyalty to a particular artist. That I think it's clear that there were certain, all artists were equal and some were more equal than others. But there was this sense that the Motown sound was the Motown sound, that you needed to stay consistent to that in terms of the quality. I think that began to break down later in the decade, but this quality control thing, I think is enormously important. And you're talking about the candor. I think that made a difference. I mean, they just released very few duds. They just did. I mean, very, very few duds because they knew what they were doing and they were consistent about it.
Yeah, and I think part of the artist development was the idea we're willing to invest all sorts of time and money in your development, but the other thing is we're developing you to contribute to our brand.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think Gordy had a very, very clear image of what the Motown brand image was and should be. And the artist, it was assumed that they would submit to that and be part of that project.
Yes.
All sorts of interesting developments happened. Martha Reeves started out at Motown as a secretary for Mickey Stevenson, their A&R. And she was there for a couple of years before they had a problem. The union guy was coming in and they were making an instrumental track without a singer, which was against the union rules. So like, oh man, we need a singer real quick. The union guy's coming. And Martha Reeves said, I'll do it. It's the chance she had been waiting for. She had gone in to try to become a singer.
That's right. So you have a couple things there for sure, right? I mean, it's obviously you've got, there's all sorts of happy accidents like that. You've also, Motown was a place that attracted people of great talent. I would imagine even like the janitors and whatnot were, had, songwriting or singing aspirations. There was something about that place that was a kind of hothouse environment that was just so nurturing, and just people rose to the occasion. And when that moment happened, right, when they needed her, she walked in there, she belted it out. It's like, whoa. But I just think there's something about Gordy. and he a fair amount of criticism is heaped his way, of course, but there's something about Gordy and the kind of environment that he created at Motown, within that community, if you will, that I think was extremely powerful. Now, was it as wholesome as has long been contended? To probably not. Were there problems? There clearly were problems, but there was something about Motown that elevated everybody within the company, everyone. And
and that's the other thing. You have this massive talent,
yes,
all concentrated in one place. That could have been absolutely explosive. Imagine,
yes,
the normal amount of ego and conflict in a situation like that. Why did he get that song? Oh, I wanted that song. Intrigue, all of that thing could have been going on all the time, to the point that it never got to where it got.
Yeah, that's right.
You're absolutely right. This, again, I think something that he brought with him from his family. And look, Motown was full of his actual family. They were in management. They were writing songs.
It's true.
There were Gordys all through the infrastructure of that organization. But the idea, yeah, we're all in this together, and we're trying to build something that's bigger than any of us.
Yes.
And your success is our success. And it's not, if you can help someone else out by singing in the background or by
that's right.
You do it.
That's right.
And it's one thing to do it because you actually like each other too.
You do.
I think there was really a kind of a family.
I do think that's right. I do think that's right. And I think that it stayed together as long as it did is really a testament to Gordy himself, right? Because as you're suggesting, the egos could have just, derailed this whole thing. And clearly, there were disputes and all of that. But in the end, Gordy creates an environment that allowed people to prosper. And it is historically significant. I mean, this Motown is more than just a record label. It really is. It's a kind of cultural phenomenon, maybe a cultural phenomenon that could only happen in the United States. I mean, it is an enormous success story that it's hard to find something that parallels it. I mean, Berry Gordy he's an amazing figure. He's clearly a flawed figure, but he's an amazing, amazing human, and frankly, an amazing American.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if you take a look at the associations, at the relationships, even people who had problems with the company and had problems with their treatment in the company, they're still, hugging and
that's exactly
each other.
That's right.
Just try to imagine something like that going on with Buffalo Springfield or any number of famous music acts that really made it big and just can't stand each other and don't want to be around each other anymore.
Yeah, decades later, there's still the harboring grudges.
Yeah, you really don't see that.
You don't see that in Motown. I think that's right, and I think that goes back to Gordy and the atmosphere that he created. And so, Dave, let's as we kind of wind down here, maybe give you the last word regarding Gordy. What has emerged for you? What is important about Gordy for you? What is the thing that really stands out?
Well, I think I've been saying it throughout. It's just the fact that he's clearly an entrepreneur, but an entrepreneur with heart. I think he compared this whole thing to, the production line. You start off with a frame of a car.
Right.
When it's through, you've got this wonderful new car that's complete, ready to roll.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how he compared the idea of an artist coming in, just raw talent and having to be formed. And
sure,
he saw himself as a mentor, as someone who understood something about music that he was able to pass on.
Yeah.
So I think that he wanted to make a home for artists to create something big, and I think that's what he ended up doing. And to have a legacy like Motown Records is an incredible testament.
Absolutely, I agree with you completely. So take us out, Dave. What here in the final moments here? What should our loyal viewers need to do, or should they want to subscribe and so on?
Well, listen, one of the things that you'll definitely want to do is check out the playlists for this episode.
Right.
Fantastic stuff. Just one great hit after the other.
That's right.
Very interesting, a lot of fun to listen to. Check out the playlist. You can find that here. If you want to subscribe, listen to other episodes of Behind the Curtain, do that here. You can also listen to our 50 years ago this month, talking about the top 40 of Billboard Top 100, Hot 100s. Well, we've been talking about 1970 and now 1971. Can check that out here as well.
Yeah.
You can find another episode of Behind the Curtain right here. And we hope you check it out.
Absolutely. So we'll see you next time, everybody. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.